Good afternoon, and thank you so much, Amanda, for that lovely welcome. Tá áthas orm bheith anseo LIANZA. It's my little nod to Irish. I'm very, very happy to be here at LIANZA with you today. Certainly representing a little island on the far side of the world, 28 hours later from having left home. I'm here with you today. Now, so I also stand before you as an Irish woman, but also as an archivist in a room full of librarians. So please do bear with me. I'll start off by giving you just a little background to myself. So as a child, I was always very interested in history and certainly grew up in a house just surrounded by books. My mother in particular has a really wide range of interests, and our house is full of books on history, art, fiction, biographies, literature, old Irish houses and families, local history, etc. In college, I studied history, and while studying for my master's, which was in local Irish history, I came across a reference to a collection of archival papers relating to a local landed estate in Ireland. And it's actually this beautiful estate here, Mucker's House in Killarney. And while the estate papers had survived, and which was fantastic fortune that they had survived, they had been deposited in the local studies department of the county library. But because there was no archivist employed by the library, the papers were left in boxes, completely uncatalogued, unordered, and totally inaccessible to any interested researchers. So I suppose this got me thinking a little bit about historical collections or archives, and the important role that archivists play in making raw material of history available to users, be those users academic historians or just interested members of the public. So hence I became an archivist, a profession I hadn't known when I started off on my historic endeavour. At a strict definition, the archivist's role is not to interpret history, but rather to make archival collections available to users, in accordance to the provenance of those records within the collection. So thus, the role of the archivist is to be a gatekeeper for access to correct and authentic information. From an archive perspective, the pillars of context and provenance are all important. And this theme of providing access to our history through archival collections is something that I'm going to explore further in relation to our own archive, the Guinness Archive. The Guinness Archive exists, as Amanda said in her introduction, to acquire, preserve, catalogue, and make accessible the records of the Guinness Company and brand. But most importantly, the archive exists to actively use the heritage of this famous brand to inform its future. Guinness was founded in 1759 when this rather handsome gentleman here, a young Arthur Guinness, signed a lease on a rundown brewery in St. James's Gate for an incredible 9,000 years. So clearly he was a man with a bit of vision and certainly a belief in his own beer. I'd kid not, it is 9,000 years. Since that time, the brewery has just grown from strength to strength, and throughout the 19th century, it became the largest brewery in the world, and the brand is now enjoyed in 150 countries all around the world. Few other nations can claim such a national identity to a product as Ireland can to Guinness. It's a brand that forms very much part of the Irish cultural identity in a way that is quite unique. On the 17th of March every year, St. Patrick's Day, the world, including New Zealand, turns green, and some of the 250 plus people globally who claim Irish heritage, and indeed many of those who don't, raise a pint of Guinness in honour of the day. The definition, I suppose, of national identity very much varies, but generally relates to a person's sense of belonging to one state or nation. This can be realised in many ways, as an awareness of difference to other nations, a communal sense of belonging and connection, or a sense of a nation as a cohesive whole, as represented by distinctive traditions, culture, and language. For Ireland and for Irish people, Guinness very much is a brand that symbolises the Irish identity. A recent report by ITIC, which is our Irish Tourist Industry Confederation, states that, believe it or not, 80% of visitors to Ireland last year cited that the desire to experience an Irish pub influenced their decision to visit Ireland. Not quite sure what that says about us as a nation, but it's good for me working for Guinness. A visit to an Irish pub is the #1 rated unique visitor experience in Ireland. So therefore, that act of consuming the distinctive national product, which is Guinness, is intimately bound up with Irish identity, both by Irish people themselves and by tourists coming to Ireland to experience this Irishness. Marketing executives say that Guinness long ago abandoned the confines of product, that Guinness itself is actually a life story and is a lifestyle, a story, and part of who we are. Therefore, within the Guinness Archive, we preserve the heritage of a brand that is intrinsically linked with Ireland's national identity, and we very much act as the custodian of this cultural icon. And this, in turn, has carved out quite a unique role for the Guinness Archive, as we're one of the few global corporate archives who are open to the public. However, this is a role that has almost been demanded of by the company, and references back to that sense of ownership felt by the public towards the brand, that the public actually expects the brand archive to be accessible to them almost as a right. In fact, when the archive was set up, it formed part of the corporate relations function, as it was seen as an extension of the public face of the company, and very much adding to the positive reputation of the company in the eyes of stakeholders and consumers. This public remit sets the Guinness Archive very much apart from other corporate archives who primarily exist for the use of their parent company. We provide access to information that is culturally relevant to our identity as a nation through our public remit, but we also provide access to information that is a commercial value to our parent company. And very much the challenge for the archive is to assess and balance both needs effectively. So I'm going to start by outlining some of the public remit from the archive and then give you a few case studies of some of the commercial projects that we've been involved in, showing the commercial value of the archive back to our parent organisation. So from its foundation, as I mentioned, in 1759, Guinness is the largest indigenous Irish company to have existed over 250 years. The image here shows some of our extensive archive, and if the paper was laid out end to end, it would span over 7,000 linear metres of paper records alone, so a very substantial collection. The functions of the brewery, however, have not changed much in the course of these 3 centuries. The brewery has always had to buy raw materials, always had to employ people, always had to build buildings, always had to brew beer, had to package and distribute that beer, and from the 20th century onwards had to advertise their product. And the records in the archive reflect all of these functions. However, the brewery did not exist within an economic vacuum. Rather, the brewery was the largest employer in Dublin City, and it's actually estimated that by about 1930, 1 in 30 Dubliners were dependent on the brewery for their livelihood. The brewery also developed a very deserved reputation for looking after the welfare of its employees, from providing health care to employees and their families, to building employee housing, to providing non-contributory pensions to all employees. And actually the pension was provided as early as the 1880s, which was about 30 years before the state pension. Most employees lived within the vicinity of the brewery, very much creating a community of brewery families who all worked together and, importantly, socialised together. The brewery is often referred to, and I love this phrase, that it was a city within a city. It had its own medical centre, its own ambulance, its own fire brigade, which we actually still have today. At one stage, there was 7 different restaurants because of the 7 different classes of employees who worked in the brewery. And it even had its own rail network spanning over 50 acres. A whole network of Irish farmers have supplied barley to the brewery for over 250 years. And today, for example, the brewery buys over 100,000 tonnes of Irish barley annually for the brewing process. At the other end of the process, The brewery supplies tens of thousands of pubs with beer from the brewery. And in the 1960s, it's said that the excise duties alone propped up the Irish economy when there was a dearth of Irish industry to contribute to the state coffers. The social and economic and cultural value of this Guinness heritage story is preserved by the archive and is used extensively by members of the public. One of the biggest users of the archive by members of the public is in tracing their family history. And we hold over 20,000 individual employee files dating back to over 150 years. The genealogy service that we provide to the public is completely free of charge, so be that the online service and the service offered to researchers who come into our research room. These inquiries make up just some of the 5,000 plus public inquiries that we receive every year. The nature of working in the brewery was very much a family affair, and it actually isn't unusual to find several generations of the same family all working for the brewery. Unlike the official government records, such as census records, I'm not sure if you can read some of those behind me, but the employment files in the archive really provide a huge amount of information and sometimes colour about an employee. So you get an awful lot of information on the files, such as employees' previous employment or schooling, details of their parents, where their parents worked. Within the application forms, there's details such as the number of teeth an employee had, his height and his weight. And these are files going back to the 1880s, so a time before photography. So I often get people coming in and saying, you know, our family are always really tall, and actually our great-grandfather was really tall. That must be where it came from. So really providing that lot of colour. You get a lot of career details and personal information at the time of pension also recorded, which can provide information on the next generation in terms of marital status and children. And this year, very much due to the commemorations marking the start of the First World War, we've seen a huge increase in family members searching for details of their relatives who either left the brewery to go to war or were employed by the brewery on their return from the war. Out of a workforce of about 4,000, predominantly men at that stage, over 800 men left the brewery during 1914 to 1918 to join the armed forces. Employees were very much encouraged by the brewery's management to enlist in the war effort, as their jobs were guaranteed by the brewery on their return from war, and half wages were paid to the men who enlisted in addition to their army wage. The brewery management set up what was known as a War Gifts Committee to arrange care packages of food, clothes, cigarettes, lighters to be sent to men at the front. And all these employment records and records relating to World War I have been catalogued and are accessible to researchers and members of the public. Our genealogy files are accessible through a database within the Guinness Storehouse website, and we've recently made our more general catalogue available online for researchers to browse the catalogue remotely. So opening up the archive to the public in this way has been very much an extension of the corporate relations function of Diageo, which is our parent company, very much in generating and promoting goodwill towards the organisation and the Guinness brand. The archive is open to the public as a national resource in a way that no other corporate archive can own. There is an expectation by the public that this information be available to the nation as part of Ireland's cultural written heritage. However, as much as this expectation may exist among the public, it wouldn't be feasible for the archive to survive within a business corporate environment without very much having a commercial focus in delivering value back to the business. And I'll just give you a few case studies of how we do this. So within Diageo, as I say, which is our parent company, we work very much cross-functionally across many different departments. Primarily, some up on the screen there, corporate relations, marketing, legal and intellectual property, licensing, brewing, so the brewers themselves, and Guinness Storehouse, which is the visitor centre in the St. James's Gate Brewery, where the archive is located. Across the business, the archive collection is very much valued as our inspiration for the future of the brand. Information, as we all know, doesn't exist in a vacuum, and the information, assets, and stories preserved within the archive are recognised as important foundation pillars to tell the story of the brand both today and in the future. As historians and as family history researchers, we're all familiar with the term genealogy, where it relates to tracing people's ancestors and understanding a bit more of where we came from and from who we're descended. So we're all familiar with terminology such as pedigree, ancestry, descent, lineage, parentage, paternity, family, roots, etc. However, the concept of brand genealogy is actually quite new within the corporate world as a method of understanding how brands create what's known as identity value. Brand genealogy allows for a true understanding of brand history and positioning, this being in the context of cultural and societal settings, as well as communication objectives, thus informing the future direction of the brand. How this actively works is that we work closely with the global strategy marketing team for Guinness to provide really that depth of understanding about both the history of the brand and the history of the development of the brand in order to use the past to anchor the brand in the future. This can be achieved in several ways, one of which is brand fame and cultural relevance. Cultural traction or cultural vibrancy is about looking at your brand from the outside in and not just from the inside out. It's done by looking at hidden meanings in everyday culture and making sure that brands are seeing and driving the future to keep brands fresh and relevant in today's society. Our marketeers strive to deliver this brand fame and cultural relevance for Guinness. The key is to understanding what our target market will already be exposed to in media and why, and then finding our place within this topic. The archive is often used as a resource to establish the credibility of the brand within a particular story or topic, and the archive very much validates the brand's right to join that topical conversation. So an example of this is that this year, 2014, is very much a year where globally we celebrate exploration with several anniversaries of expeditions and adventures, including those heroic expeditions to the South Pole. Guinness has many connections with these South Pole explorers. For example, the Guinness family are said to have donated money to Ernest Shackleton for his various expeditions. An Irishman on the left of the screen there, Tom Crean, was part of the Endurance expedition. And when he had finished in the Navy, he came home to run a bar in his native Kerry, and a Guinness television advert was made about his story. The Australian explorer Sir Douglas Mawson left some Guinness behind at his base camp, which was discovered by another expedition in 1927. So all of these brand stories allow Guinness to have a voice in any media conversation about exploration and the commemoration of expeditions. I've already mentioned the connection between the Guinness Brewery and the First World War, where a quarter of our population enlisted in the British forces. As the largest Irish Indigenous company who has survived through 2 world wars and several revolutions, Guinness has the credibility to speak to these topics in a way that actually no other Irish company or corporate can. To this end, the archive is mounting an exhibition on the theme of World War I to be hosted by the Little Museum of Dublin, which tells the human story of those men who left the brewery to fight in the war. Again, it's providing culturally relevant content to speak about Guinness in a different way. It also allows the Guinness Archive to provide support to a much smaller organisation, the Little Museum of Dublin, which was established just a few years ago to tell the story of Dublin in the 20th century, a story which is hugely interlinked with the history of Guinness. Another much more popular example of working on culturally relevant content is that in 2016, we'll be celebrating 50 years since the arrival of the miniskirt. Invented, how this relates to Guinness, invented by Mary Quant, the miniskirt was popularised by icons such as Brigitte Bardot, Twiggy, Jackie Kennedy. Its arrival helped revolutionise the 1960s liberation movement. And again, by utilising the amazing Guinness ads from the 1960s and 1970s that featured women at the forefront of fashion, Guinness can assert its right to have a voice in this cultural space. And actually looking at the archive material in this way is a change to how the marketing team and the archive have worked together in the past. So previously, the teams were much more focused in celebrating more traditional anniversaries. So this day 10 years ago, this day 50 years ago, this day 100 years ago, something happened. But actually, this new use of the archive to provide credibility to a brand that is 255 years old and that can legitimately have a voice in everyday culture ensures that Guinness remains relevant and front of mind with consumers in a way that other brands can't achieve. As well as working closely with our marketing function, we also work closely with another department within Diageo, which is our licensing team. And that team is responsible for all Guinness licensed product which is produced and licensed globally. So anything that you can put Guinness on, so a t-shirt, a postcard, a mug, a pen, right down to food. And this accounts for over 50 million branded units are sold globally every year with the Guinness logo on them. The archive works with our new product development team to identify new images and information from the collection that can be used either as inspiration or as visuals on new products. As the archive uncovers new material as a result of cataloguing, we're able to provide the licensing team and their licensees with a new and untapped resource for inspiration for new product development for Guinness merchandise. In fact, the licensing team used the fact that there is such a strong visual archive to secure deals with high-profile licensees to encourage them to work with Guinness to develop new product. The licensees get inspiration both from the history of the brand itself and from the graphic-driven advertising heritage, which then in turn directly translates into licensed product. A great example of this is this lovely image on the left-hand side from the 1970s, when, as I just mentioned, Guinness undertook a very classy, sophisticated approach to advertising to women. And this little black drink advert was uncovered in the archive just a few years ago when the designers were looking for some historical images to feature on a range of women's clothing. And it's since featured on a whole range of products across both clothing and giftware, from t-shirts to pens to bags to luggage tags. Another example I'm going to talk about is something that we call the Brewers Project. And it's very much a recent example of how the archive is at the heart of the future developments and innovations of the brand. Innovation and a passion for brewing has always been very much part of the DNA of the brewers at St. James's Gate, where the brewers have been refining their brewing techniques since the advancement of scientific brewing in the 19th century. And lying right in the heart of our brewery is a building which is known as our pilot plant, which is a small microbrewery that's been home to various different innovations for Guinness over the past 100 years. And this year, for the very first time, it was decided to open up the doors of the pilot plant to the public and to introduce a new range of Guinness beers to the market, which were crafted by our brewers in the pilot plant. This was the first liquid innovation to have been developed by Guinness in several years, and was developed to offer beer lovers something different and a fresh take on what's been enjoyed for centuries. What's unique about this project is actually the archive was very much central to the delivery of it. So we used our brand expertise and knowledge of the archive collection to uncover the earliest brewing recipes to have survived in the archive. And working directly in tandem with the brewers, we helped them to interpret the 18th century recipe books dating from the lifetime of Arthur Guinness himself, to provide inspiration for two new releases, Guinness Dublin Porter and Guinness West Indies Porter. And actually in doing so, we the archivists stepped out of the more traditional archivist role in just presenting history in favour of interpreting history, something that is now a very big feature of our work. The marketing angle on these new beers is that they're based on original 200-year-old recipes. And because of this, the archive very much was part of developing the brand story behind the beers. With its origins in the 1796 entry in the Brewer's Diary, so that's the image on the left-hand side, Guinness Dublin Porter was inspired by the golden age of porter in the 1800s. This was a time when porter was the working man's beer, and after a long day's work in Dublin or London, Guinness would have been a respected choice. West Indies porter then is based on the recipe on the right-hand side of the page. It's based on an 1801 diary entry. And this was the first Guinness to have been purposely brewed to maintain its freshness on long sea voyages to the Caribbean and beyond. To guarantee the best quality on arrival, the beer was brewed with a higher hop rate and higher gravity, as this new beer still is. The archive was very much also the inspiration behind the packaging for these beers. So traditionally, all publicans in the UK and Ireland would have bottled their own beer. And while the brewery did issue their own labels, many publicans chose to design their own labels in a whole range of different styles, colours, shapes, and fonts. The archive preserves a series of these label books and worked with designers to create labels which accurately reflected the rich history of the brand. And lastly, the archive was very much central to the launch of these new beers, which took place just last month, actually, just at the start of September. And these were launches which were simultaneously to media in Dublin and London, and the archivists and the brewers shared centre stage at the launch events. So the involvement of the archivists at these new product launches provided credibility to this innovation story, as the fact that these so-called new beers were actually inspired by original, authentic brewers' recipes that were preserved in the archives. And this very much gives the beers a genuine origin story that no other brewer in the UK or Ireland can match. Therefore, the existence of the archive affirms that Guinness has a long history in beer innovation and that the craft of brewing has been very much at the heart of the brand for 255 years. I suppose the most direct public-facing manifestation of the work of the archive is evident in the Guinness Storehouse in Dublin. So this is actually where the archive is based. The Storehouse is the brand's visitor centre, located right in the heart of the brewery, as you can see, full steam coming out of the brew house and everything. The Storehouse, it's an old fermentation building which was built in 1904 and transformed in the year 2000 into a really highly immersive visitor centre for the brand. You can see the shape of the pint down the centre. The Storehouse, it's actually the #1 visitor attraction in Ireland, which goes back to my statistic about Irish pubs and people coming to Irish pubs at the start. And for such a small island of a population of 4 million, we welcome just over 1.1 million visitors to the Storehouse every year. And it ranks in the top 5 fee-paying global brand attractions in the world. And the Storehouse is there to tell the Guinness story, underpinned by the core Guinness brand values of power, goodness, and communion. But actually, when plans for the Storehouse were being laid out in the late 90s, it was always envisaged that the archive would have its home in the Storehouse. The fact that Guinness is a brand that not just talks about having a rich heritage, but actually has that rich heritage in the form of its extensive archive collection is a really unique brand asset. Therefore, by locating the archive in the brand visitor centre, the archive very much helps to authenticate that visitor experience. As an archive working within a brand experience environment, our focus is always on ways to improve the heritage experience for visitors and for those who come in contact with the brand within our building. Within the Storehouse, this collaboration between the archive and the layout and the content of the brand manifests itself in different ways. And in many ways, the Storehouse is the public face of the archive, in that the whole building references the heritage of the brand, telling the story from its origins at St. James's Gate in Dublin to its growth as a global brand all around the world. More and more, however, the delivery of this heritage content is moving away from the traditional museum environment towards a digital environment. The harnessing of the digital age to connect with our visitors has become a prime focus within the Storehouse. And I suppose this has very much challenged us to relook at the medium in which we deliver information, to ensure that our visitors have a fun and engaging experience, which ultimately makes them think much more positively about Guinness and brings them closer to the brand. For visitors, we want a trip to the Storehouse to be the beginning of a brand experience rather than just a visit to a tourist attraction. And the archivist is very much part of the project team for the development of all new experiences within the storehouse. So last year, for example, we installed what we call a taste experience, our tasting rooms, which introduces visitors to the unique taste of Guinness through a tutored tasting session, which calls on the use of all 5 senses. So this is conducted in 2 very different physical sensory environments, one of which is called the Velvet Chamber on the screen behind me. And it very much takes its inspiration from the 18th century house on the brewery site where Arthur Guinness lived. We introduced original items from the archive's artefact collection to make the environment more authentic, and we oversaw the historical narrative both in the physical space and through the tour guide scripts. This year, we're investing over $1.5 million in a new advertising exhibit, which will take visitors on a journey through the world of the really world-class advertising that Guinness has created for the past 80 years. And again, the archive will be central to the development of both the narrative story and also providing the content for the exhibition in the form of digitized old print and television advertising and providing context to all of the content. Thus, in a sector where corporate archives exist primarily to promote the heritage of the parent organisation, we're very much unique in having that dual mandate, the public as well as corporate. Arguably, this has been developed as a result of the unique position that the Guinness brand, the Guinness company and brewery play in the Irish cultural heritage and psyche of what it means to be Irish. The archive would not be fulfilling its role to the full if it did not serve both the public as well as our parent organisation. However, we couldn't provide a service to the public if we did not bring a commercial value to the brand. And conversely, because of the unique role of the brand in Irish cultural heritage, the company would be doing itself a disfavour from a corporate reputation and goodwill perspective if it didn't allow public access to the rich Guinness heritage. So this dual mandate, as dictated by the public, is very much unique among global brand archives and certainly does present its own challenges. So, for example, working in the corporate archive sector, there's a constant challenge to justify the existence of the archive, which is very much a support function of the brand rather than a direct revenue-generating function. And this has had to make us become very focused in terms of our resources and also in terms of the projects that we get involved in, as well as being very clear on the measurement of success of the archive. And we use a number of tools, I suppose, to help focus our priorities. So the first being a very clearly defined mission statement. So we're very, very clear that the mission of the Guinness Archive is to provide access to the heritage of the brand for the future development of the brand. So right back to the theme of the conference of Connect and Thrive, to very much use the past as an anchor to use the past to anchor the brand in the future. We work on trying to be very project strategic when it comes to requesting the allocation of limited resources. So of all of those examples and all that great work we do, you'll be pleased to know there's only 2 of us who work in the archive delivering all this work. So we have to be really focused in the projects that we take on. Certainly no point in being busy fools and not delivering projects of value. Very much important to, again, working in a corporate environment, putting metrics and KPIs against every aspect of our service and always determining the value back to the organisation. And it doesn't always have to be a commercial value, like in the case of our licensing, but it can be a value to local, national communities or to the parent organisation. One of the things I think really brings us a lot of success is when we collaborate, and that's collaborating either with other functions within the brewery or with external institutions, such as our collaboration within the Little Museum of Dublin. And lastly, just having fun at work. I have to say, after my 14 years of working in the archive, it's absolutely an amazing place to work in. Our brand, we don't say where our brand is 255 years old, we say it's 255 years young, with another 8,000 odd years left to run on our lease. And it's certainly not every day that you get to meet the great or the good. Here's me with one of our more famous visitors last year, Mr. Tom Cruise, who came to the brewery. So it's a great brand to work on, an amazing archive. And if you're ever in Dublin, please do look me up. Thank you.
Comments?
Yes.
Yep.
Eibhlin, I noticed in the photograph of the archive in the storehouse, it appears to be a display of bottles.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the front end of our archive. I had another slide there which showed some of our storage areas. So the front of the archive has about 2,000 bottles as part of our display. So we have a huge packaging collection as part of the archive. But then we do have a very large air-conditioned storeroom for all of our paper material.
Well, follow-on question, if I may. You have the collection of packaging. Do you actually have a collection of beers as well?
We do, yeah, absolutely. So packaging is the physical 4-pack, or it can be the bottles and or the cans. So yeah, our earliest bottle dates back to about the 1850s. And we collect packaging on beers that have been developed and created from all over the world. So we do have Guinness, I say, is on sale in 150 countries and actually brewed in over 50 at the moment. So we have examples of packaging from all of those countries.
But is it actually a collection of the beer also, like the wine cellar?
Yes, yeah. So that bottle display is a lot of our packaging collection. So we don't generally keep the liquid in the bottle. So not quite like a wine cellar, or if you were going to a whiskey experience. We're interested just in the packaging, the bottle itself. You wouldn't drink beer after 6 months. Trust me.
I guess I was out of curiosity because my mother has a vintage of Guinness that we believe dates from the 1930s, which still has Guinness in it.
Okay, very good. If you send me a picture of the label, I'll be able to date it for you.
Done in the middle there. Yep.
What proportion of your collection would be
Yeah, so we started digitising maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe a little bit more, and we're focused on the parts of the collection that are most heavily used. So from a public perspective, it's very much our genealogy and so that's our 20,000 employment records. From a company perspective, we focused on our advertising collection. So we've an amazing collection of print and poster ads from the 1920s. We're in the process of digitising those. We have digitised our television adverts. So we take it on a case-by-case basis. We have a series of in-house magazines that were published from the 1950s onwards, which can be great because you'll get everything from births, deaths and marriages to profiles of people working in the brewery. So all those have been digitised. Off the top of my head, I don't have a percentage. It is still quite low, and it's something that we're working on. Overall, only about 60% of our collection is actually catalogued, and out of that proportion that's digitised, maybe 10 to 20%. So still quite low and very much a work in progress. With only 2 people, it's very much a work in progress.
Yep. Over there.
With the huge number of craft breweries opening around the world, what effect is that having on both the brand and your market share?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and that's, I suppose, the project that I spoke about there, the Brewers Project, was one of the ways that Diageo has been looking, certainly within our beers, so within Guinness, to tap into that market. So Guinness is very much a mainstream beer, and with the Brewers Project, we're looking at going down a little bit more on the craft lines by looking through the archive. And I suppose we're looking at, by using recipes that are based on historical beers that Guinness would have produced 200 odd years ago, it's a nod to that craft movement by saying we're going back to our origins, we're going back to let the brewers explore and delve into the archive and develop beers using as an inspiration from those original recipes. As a market share, very much depends country to country. So certainly in the States, craft beers is completely taking off. In Ireland and GB, not as much, but certainly we're seeing a huge upwards trajectory within that as well. So projects like the Brewers Project are Guinness's version of a craft beer.
Anyone else? Quite hard to see from up here, actually. Got the lights in your eyes. May I ask something?
Yes.
You mentioned that you were going to be visiting the Lion Brewery tomorrow morning, and just following on from the question down here, do you think it's likely that there are unfound sort of Guinness treasures lurking in places in Australia and New Zealand?
Yeah, there could well be. So I'm taking the opportunity while I'm here in Auckland to go and visit the Lion Nathan Brewery, and an invitation from the librarian there to go out and have a look at their collection. And I think it'd be really interesting, especially with some of the Guinness-owned breweries. We know an awful lot about their history, but not as much from the licensed brewery perspective. So in New Zealand, Guinness was started to be brewed under license in the 1960s. And at that stage, the brewers from Dublin would have gone over to oversee the setup and the establishment of the brewery. But actually, since then, it's always been operated on a license on a third-party basis. So really interested to see what collection they have and what material they have. I'm sure there will be material I haven't seen before.
Excellent.